On January 9th, 2017, Dan Primack dropped this BFD in his first Axios newsletter. Since then, we've covered a lot of deals, over 10,000. M&A deals, VC deals, private equity deals, growth capital, IPOs, and more. If you work in deal making, you know it can be a lot to keep track of. That's why now we're launching Deals Tracker, a new feature exclusively for Axios Pro. Deals Tracker uses AI to read and consolidate our coverage, giving you the information you need about the deals that matter to you. Here's how it works. Every deal we've reported on has been added to a new searchable archive, and every deal we cover in the future will be added too. The Deals Tracker gives you quick access to deal history for companies and investors across a variety of industries. You can easily narrow your research, focusing on the things that you care about. The tool lets you easily see different deal types to understand who's raising money, who's buying or selling, who's merging, or big personnel moves. The search results are concise and easy to read, giving you the most important information in seconds. But if you need to dig deeper, you'll be able to download deal data or explore our in-depth reporting, giving you context to why deals happened. When you combine the utility of the Deals Tracker with the analysis and expertise from our industry-leading journalists, Axios Pro now offers the most helpful toolkit available to the modern dealmaker. All Axios Pro Deal subscribers get instant access to Deals Tracker. Subscribe today at axiospro.com. On January 9th, 2017, Dan Primack dropped this BFD in his first Axios newsletter. Since then, we've covered a lot of deals, over 10,000. M&A deals, VC deals, private equity deals, growth capital, IPOs, and more. If you work in deal making, you know it can be a lot to keep track of. That's why now we're launching Deals Tracker, a new feature exclusively for Axios Pro. Deals Tracker uses AI to read and consolidate our coverage, giving you the information you need about the deals that matter to you. Here's how it works. Every deal we've reported on has been added to a new searchable archive, and every deal we cover in the future will be added too. The Deals Tracker gives you quick access to deal history for companies and investors across a variety of industries. You can easily narrow your research, focusing on the things that you care about. The tool lets you easily see different deal types to understand who's raising money, who's buying or selling, who's merging, or big personnel moves. The search results are concise and easy to read, giving you the most important information in seconds. But if you need to dig deeper, you'll be able to download deal data or explore our in-depth reporting, giving you context to why deals happened. When you combine the utility of the Deals Tracker with the analysis and expertise from our industry-leading journalists, Axios Pro now offers the most helpful toolkit available to the modern dealmaker. All Axios Pro Deal subscribers get instant access to Deals Tracker. Subscribe today at axiospro.com.
Welcome aboard.
Please welcome Axios senior business reporter, Hope King.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here in person, and to those of you watching live online, thank you also for joining us today. Follow Axios events on social using that hashtag so you can chime in, weigh in, post your photos and your insights that you're finding to be most relevant for you. This morning, we have a really exciting exclusive event as part of our News Shapers event series, and we're gonna go one-on-one with two leaders who are pivotal to shaping international and domestic policies. So in these exclusive conversations, we're going to go deep on the latest issues facing the U.S. economy, including, of course, the UAW strike, as well as the Senate's ambitious fall agenda. But first, let's examine the rest of the world, and specifically how the White House thinks about international economic development. Please join me in welcoming Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics, Mike Pyle. Good morning. Thank you for being here. First of all, how are you?
I'm well. It's great to be here.
Congratulations.
Bright and early.
Yeah, bright and early. We love these, bright and early. Congratulations on so many things. You recently passed, 16 months now in this officially in this role, and you have a new daughter in your life, so you have a lot going on.
A fair amount going on. Just went all the way around the world on a trip to India and Singapore. Back here, feet beneath me, I think, mostly, but great to be here this morning.
So I want to begin with sort of an orientation of where we are right now. You've described this moment as being a historic one for unity on a lot of economic issues that you think many countries agree on. What are those issues that many of our allies agree on, and why is this a historic moment for unity specifically?
So I think that's exactly right. And I think that there are a couple of key examples, both from the G20 summit last week in Delhi, but also from the G7 summit earlier this year in Hiroshima, Japan, which highlight the point. First, with respect to the G20, I think one thing that we have consistently heard, that the president has consistently heard, is that developing countries, low and middle income countries, are really calling out for credible, high standard, transparent sources of development finance to meet their needs around public health, around the energy transition, around much else besides. And I think the G20 very powerfully rallied around the president's proposal to expand the World Bank, which is an institution that's been stamped by American leadership since its founding, that does offer that type of high standard, transparent development finance, to expand the World Bank to help low and middle income countries meet those needs. So that'd be one example. I think on the G7 side, the things that really come to mind are the way in which I think the G7 as a whole really aligned on an approach on China, recognizing that we don't need to be in the business of decoupling from China, but we do need to focus on de-risking. And in particular, in areas like sensitive advanced technologies that can lead to military modernization, surveillance modernization, we need to build a toolkit, including export controls, including outbound investment restrictions, that can meet our policy objective of not compromising our national security collectively around sensitive technologies. So that'd be just a couple of examples of places where I really see a high degree of unity.
You've also said that you have a great deal of optimism at this moment too, which might be strange given the number of issues that you're tackling, the number of players. What is giving you that sense of optimism at this moment?
So I would look back to another issue around which I think there was significant unity at the G7, and that would be the focus that we've seen on the clean energy transition. Obviously, the president, along with Congress, passed the Inflation Reduction Act a little more than a year ago, a historic bill that put historic degrees of incentives and federal backing behind renewable energy, batteries, electric vehicles, the clean energy transition broadly. We worked very hard to say this is a model not just for the United States, not just to build a strong middle-class foundation of jobs and industry around the clean energy transition, but really a model for the rest of the world. That the needs around the clean energy transition are so vast, are so great, that we can't just be investing here in the United States, so that's obviously critical, but other countries need to join us as well. And I think what we've seen in the European Union, in Canada, in Japan, in a range of emerging countries, is that they're following the model that President Biden set through the Inflation Reduction Act, and similarly investing in their own clean energy transitions. That means that my work is, in some ways, exciting and optimistic, because we're all aligned around a common model. And now the goal is, how do we align our approaches? How to be sure that we're acting together rather than at cross purposes with one another?
You need that optimism for the job that you have. And I'm also wondering if you're hearing from our partners, other countries, your counterparts, that they share that same sense of optimism, especially if you look at developing countries who are clearly not as well resourced as the United States.
So I think what we are hearing from the developing countries is that their needs are vast. That is true both because of the dislocations that we've seen from Russia's war, food insecurity, energy insecurity, broader economic insecurity as a result of the impact of the war, but also because of the structural challenges that they face, again, around the energy transition, around public health, around the fragility of states in important regions of the world. And so what we hear from them is that they think there's a path to a better future, a path to solving those problems, but they need a credible source of finance to help them do that. That isn't opaque, that doesn't have strings attached, that's credible, that's transparent, that's high standard. We think if we deliver that, both the United States alongside our allies and partners, but also multilaterally through institutions like the World Bank, that we can really deliver on that hope and that optimism to solve these problems together.
So is what I'm hearing from you that the countries that you're talking to want the same things, they just don't have the financing to be able to deliver on it?
I think that they have a similar set of goals to us, and I think if we're able to help them achieve those goals through a new incredible source of finance, we can help them get there.
I want also for folks to understand and appreciate your role, which is a very important one, in really looking at economic data and trends and delivering them to many departments within our government, and also getting that intel back to inform economic policy. And the reason I want to bring that up is also because for a lot of Americans and the general public, they might not understand why it should matter to them how you're thinking about and recommending these policies. Why should the average American care about what the rest of the world is doing?
So I'd say a couple things. One, for example, on things like the energy transition and meeting the moment on climate. What the United States does matters for the rest of the world, because the United States is big, because we are a leader, and when we set a model for what it means to achieve goals, that matters just because the United States is a big player in its own right. But we can't, as a globe, achieve those goals, achieve where we need to get with respect to the energy transition and climate, unless others act alongside us. And so the critical piece of my work has been to say, we've all got to act in common to get where we need to go. The president has set an agenda, set a model for how the United States is going to get there. We think that's a model that others can replicate, a model that will allow us to get where we need to go on climate, to rebuild industrial capacity in the United States and in key partners to achieve middle-class opportunities for workers in the United States and around the world. This is a a vision, a goal that, again, is rooted in the United States, rooted in our economic strength and vitality, but is also a model that can be replicated so that we all get to where we need to go together.
And among the countries that you're talking to, which ones do you see as being very eager and which ones are more reticent?
So I don't know that I would characterize countries along that binary. I mean, I think that what we hear is an articulation of their interests in economic growth, in pathways to middle-class jobs, in pathways to meeting their needs on climate. And what we work to do is to say, here's a model, here are a set of tools that we think can help you get there. Let's work together to achieve those, the United States and you together alongside one another. And if we do that, we can advance our objectives in common, both for the United States and for you and for the world.
If it isn't binary, can you give us a sense of generally, as we are now, almost fully out of the pandemic, the state and the relative health of the overall global economy? You have worked for the former administration for President Obama. You have helped with the Eurozone crisis. So relative to where we were even after the Great Financial Crisis, which 15 years ago, Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, how healthy is the state of the overall global economy?
So I might start with here in the United States, because for me, for us, that's where the story begins. I think coming out of the pandemic, we've had a historic recovery of the labor market. 19 straight months with unemployment below 4%. That's a record. We've got the lowest inflation in the G7. We've got the highest rate of economic growth in the G7. So I think a really strong and historic recovery here at home in the United States, which is why, I think being in a position to say, the president has articulated a model that works for the United States. It's a model that is delivering results for the economy in the US, but the spillovers matter for the rest of the world, and a model that works for US workers. That's a compelling thing to be able to go and say to other countries, we think there's a model here that can help us meet our goals together around energy, around much else besides, but also deliver for your economy and for your workers.
What about the rest of the world?
So I think that you are seeing a lot of the same trends, in the rest of the world as you see in the United States. A focus on investing in technology, investing in the clean energy transition. Obviously, I think other parts of the world are facing ongoing dislocations from Russia's war that they're still having to contend with. Again, energy insecurity, food insecurity, these are real challenges that really, I think in particular in low and middle income countries, characterize their presence and their outlook. But that's why we're focused on helping them get tools to combat those.
I'm also just kind of getting at the fact that the developing worlds are obviously a lot slower at coming to the level that we might need them to partner with us. And even in Europe, the recovery has been a little bit slower. So how quickly do we need all of these countries to sort of come online, especially as we're looking at, we're a year out from another election here?
So, there's no time like the present, which is why I think the president and the team feel such incredible urgency around all of these issues. The needs to deliver for the American people, for U.S. workers, those are immediate issues. Mm-hmm. The needs for the world to grow and deliver, and to chart a course to a much different energy future, those are immediate. So, again, I think my bottom line is just every day there is a sense from the president on down that this is a moment of urgency, this is a moment of focus, and this is a moment where we need to be focused on execution and delivery, because with every day that passes, that's a day that we're not taking a step towards better jobs and better growth. That's a day we're not taking a step towards a better middle-class future. That's a day we're not taking a step towards meeting our needs on climate and energy. And that's something that we're just critically and urgently focused on.
One of the other parts of your job as you travel around the world is to sell this vision to other countries. And I know we've been talking about, there may be a binary of being very eager or very reticent, but you also do have a good view of how the U.S. is perceived currently. abroad. Given we had 3 bank failures earlier in the year, we had these historic labor union movements. What is the perception that the rest of the world right now, how do they look at how we're doing, and how confident are they in the US being able to deliver on all this when we are still dealing with so many of these really hard transition issues inside of our own economy?
Well, I think the G20 offered a really good snapshot on that. And to me, the signal moment of the G20 was the president standing alongside the Prime Minister of India, the presidents of South Africa and Brazil, the president of the World Bank, hand in hand saying, we believe in the G20, and we believe that the World Bank is a vital tool to deliver a financing solution for low and middle income countries to meet their needs. And when the President of the United States is standing shoulder by shoulder with the leaders of the world's largest emerging economies, with the President of the World Bank, I think that's an image that says that American leadership matters. That's an image that says we are importantly united with the big emerging economies in the world on a common vision and a plan to do that. And so I think that, to your question, this is a moment when there's a recognition and appreciation that the United States has shown up with a plan, has shown up with a seriousness about delivering on that, and that's why you saw that kind of unity together in Delhi.
What more can businesses do to help with the transition, especially again with the historic strikes that we've seen? We're 5 days in now to the UAW strike. I mean, what message would you send to them?
So I'd say a couple things. One, we're not going to get, as a country and as a world, where we need to go on a lot of the goals we've talked about without a massive role for the private sector and for private investment. That what we're working on now in terms of putting public investment into development, public investment into the energy and technology transition here at home, that can kickstart a process. But ultimately, the scale and capacity that private capital brings is going to be essential to take us the distance to where we need to go. So whether it's in the development finance space and working with private investors, whether it's in the clean energy space and recognizing that ultimately the incentives the IRA brings to bear is about incentivizing private companies, private investors to invest. Really just at the end of the day, if we're going to get where we need to go, business investment, that has to be at the very, very heart of what we do. And we think that that's an approach that we're encouraging.
And I think that's why I want to go back to the original theme that we talked about at the beginning, which is you have a great sense of optimism. You have a great task right now of trying to unify the world on Bidenomics and the plans that are already underway here at a time when it's hard to go online without seeing people go at each other. It's, again, everywhere you turn, there seems to be a really tight labor market. So I guess what tactically can businesses do to really show that they'll be able to bring workers along ultimately, especially if we're, again, looking at more deepening relations with a country like Bolivia. Somebody in the Midwest might think, what does that have to do with me? How is that going to help me get a better education for my kids or save more money? Can you make a more direct link between where that could actually impact somebody here at home?
Well, I would say our entire approach, the president's entire approach, begins with the belief that American leadership in the world begins with domestic economic strength. That is why the president has prioritized from the very start of his administration, whether it was through the ARP or through the infrastructure bill, the IRA, the CHIPS Act, really making the strategic investments in rebuilding American capacity, industrial capacity, technology capacity, clean energy capacity. That is critical to providing strong middle-class jobs, providing a pathway to the middle class. And that is key to what it means for America to have strength and vitality economically, but also for us to lead in the world. But again, I think to the point of a lot of our conversation, when it comes to things like meeting the moment on climate, meeting the moment on the energy transition, we can take action, we can take historic action, but as a globe, we're not going to get where we need to go unless others act alongside us. So selling that model, selling that vision, identifying the tools for other countries to deliver, just as we are ourselves working to deliver, that's critical to getting to the places we need to go together, even as we recognize that the work begins here at home.
Do you think the individual person understands their individual role in all of this, that maybe that they would want to participate on a global level like this?
So, I wouldn't want to, put myself in the shoes of any other individual. I mean, I just can say that, I think the president's view is we need to focus on this moment here in the United States, focus on delivering on our investments to create a better future here at home. Focus on being sure that as we invest and grow in the United States, that workers are cut in on that bargain, that they get a fair shake, as he said, with respect to the UAW. At a time of record results for automakers, this also going to be a moment for a record contract for workers. We've got to see workers cut in on that bargain. But as I said, sort of take steps to invest and grow and provide pathways for workers to the middle class and beyond here in the United States, that model has applicability, has resonance around the world, both with respect to developing countries looking to grow themselves, but also with respect to the challenges we all face together on things like climate.
I know that there have been some changes made with respect to how Europe might benefit from the Inflation Reduction Act, but you look at India and they have their Make in India sort of campaign. You have the threat of the Chinese government telling folks they can't use iPhones in specific roles, and the rise of nationalism toward maybe Chinese brands. You met recently or earlier this year with your counterparts in South Korea who were worried that their car makers might be inadvertently disadvantaged here with tax credits. This idea of America first, we have this plan and let's all come along, that has been sort of seen as sort of protectionism also of the U.S. and countries are saying, well, I want to protect our own workers and our own economy. How can these two work together? These ideas that countries can also grow for themselves while being part of the plan that you guys are proposing?
So I think we've had an approach that puts building at its core. Building capacity, building resilience, building inclusivity, and have undertaken a set of investments to do just that. But, as I've said, the president takes the view, we take the view that we need others to build alongside us if we're going to reach these goals. That's not an attitude of America first. That's not an attitude of America alone. That's an attitude of let's all join together and take steps in common to meet the needs and the goals that we have together. That can begin with domestic economic strength and domestic economic leadership as a model for where we can go, but that also means working with other countries to help them build tools, build pathways to achieve their own goals, and again, to get to places where, whether on climate or other common challenges, we're meeting that moment together.
So if you were to sum up for our international partners the U.S. intention here, what would that be?
Say that one more time.
How would you sum up the U.S. intention for this plan?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, the summary is we're building here at home. We're building, like I said, capacity, resilience, inclusivity, and we can't, if we're going to meet the goals that we have, not just for the U.S., but for the global economy, can't be building alone. They have to be building together with our allies and partners around the world. And we think that the president's game plan, the president's approach provides a model to do just that. We think that when it comes to things like clean energy, we're seeing increasingly alignment from our key allies and partners on adopting that approach. And what we think is ultimately that's going to take us where we need to go on the clean energy transition. That's going to take us where we need to go on strong growth built on investment. That's going to take us where we need to go in terms of pathways to middle-class jobs here at home first and foremost, but also in countries around the world as well.
There's been a real emphasis by the administration to be very specific with the terminology when it comes to the relationship between U.S. and China. Secretary Raimondo recently said decoupling is neither in our economic or national security goals. Treasury Secretary Yellen has said that any kind of decoupling from China would be disastrous. So what is driving the sort of emphasis here on by saying that we are de-risking versus decoupling? Why is that important, that distinction?
Sure. I mean, let's talk about what de-risking means. As I've talked about, there are a set of advanced technologies that we think are critical to our national security that could lead to the military modernization of China, could lead to the surveillance modernization of China. Those are technologies that, whether through export controls or outbound investment restrictions, we need to protect. Ensuring that we preserve our national security through a targeted toolkit around a limited set of technologies with military applicability, that's what it means to de-risk the U.S.-China relationship. When it comes to things like the clean energy transition and the supply chains that feed that, being sure that there is no single point of failure in our supply chains around critical minerals, around batteries, being sure that we have alternative suppliers, including, most importantly, here at home, that's what it means to de-risk our relationship with China.
Is the U.S. planning for more export controls?
So I don't have any news here with respect to any tools. I think you've seen from us a set of targeted announcements with respect to investment restrictions on high technology sectors that were announced last year. Obviously, there was the announcement of last October, again, in a very targeted way, the most advanced semiconductors that have military applicability. That is the record that I'm speaking to when I talk about a targeted set of tools that preserve our core national security interests.
As we come toward the last few minutes of our conversation, I want to do a quick rapid fire round with you. How often do any of these topics get brought up by your counterparts in other countries? Elon Musk.
Never heard that.
I mean, he's been courted now by lots of countries to try to bring Tesla, bring them over there. Nobody's brought up Elon Musk or EVs or wanting to build more factories.
Well, EVs.
Yes.
Are very important.
But not Elon Musk, not in the same sentence.
We're very boring people, myself and my colleagues from other countries.
Then these next couple of terms might not come up either, because we know Taylor Swift and Beyonce have been driving the U.S. economy here. Any mention of them in your conversations?
Who are they?
Space.
Just kidding.
Space. The topic of space.
I think space is a growing topic of interest. It is not one that is the core of what I do, but I think it's an area that my friends in particular who work on the technology sphere are in dialogue with their partners.
So has that come up in your conversations that people or countries want to develop a space program?
I mean, I think we saw very recently, India's achievement with respect to their moon mission. I think that countries like India rightly take pride in moments like that, and that is something that in the discussions lead up to Delhi, I heard from my Indian colleagues. So yeah, I think reflective of the fact that that's a growing priority, you hear moments like that sort of called out, and I think my colleagues who do work on the technology sphere are regularly in dialogue about space.
Another term that I'm loath to bring up, similar to Elon Musk, is AI. Has that come up? Is that something that...
AI, I think, is a topic that is getting a lot of attention, and a lot of attention both here at home and globally. I think we are pleased with the steps that have been taken thus far here at home around a voluntary code of conduct amongst our leading AI providers. That is a model that we think is an important first step in defining the landscape around how artificial intelligence is regulated and governed. There's a lot of interest in that conversation globally. I think I heard that with my own ears, both in Hiroshima and Delhi. I think a place that's moving with a lot of interest and moving quickly. I don't have any sort of news around that, but I can say it's a topic that I think has really captured the imagination of leaders around the world.
And one last fun thing before we let you go today. Which of your 3 boys is best at negotiating?
They're all good negotiators in their own way, but my 7-year-old has a particular nose for where he has leverage.
All right, look out for him. Mike Pyle, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We have a message from a quick sponsor after this, but thanks again, Mike, for joining us. Great to talk to you.
Thanks for that.
We are seeing more about energy transition, and what's been very surprising to me is understanding that it's really all comes back to technology. The current technology that we have is in charge of give or take around 50% of all emission reduction, if it's renewable energy, solar, wind, batteries, but the rest of the almost 50% is going to be coming from technologies which have not been implemented yet. Carbon capture, hydrogen, next generation nuclear, and in the future, even nuclear fusion.
What's really interesting is when you combine government incentives with new technologies that are really driving terrific technological advancement, and then that's driving consumer behavior. If we think simply about electric vehicles, what's happening with electric vehicles is there are great incentives for people to shift from traditional vehicles to electric vehicles. So we're seeing not just increasing in automotive registrations to EVs, but we're actually seeing that shift in consumer behavior.
The Inflation Reduction Act is a total package of climate transition incentives in the United States, totaling about $369 billion. There is roughly about $40+ billion worth of incentives for consumers to take charge of our own net zero journey, of starting using these incentives and greening our homes and greening our commute and all the things that we do and consume in our daily lives.
No individual group is going to get us to achieve a low carbon economy on their own. We need the private sector, the public sector, we need individuals, and we need policymakers to be the engine that can help inform each of those groups, to allow them to make better decisions. And that is what helps move business and society forward.
Countries have to move to alternative energy to be self-supplied. Most of the planet is importing fossil and not exporting fossil, and renewable energy gives the geopolitical solution. It's up to 25% cheaper for 1 unit of energy. So the interesting thing is that we are heading into a path of net zero, whether we like it or not, whether we do or do not have an environmental question, just because now it makes perfect economic sense and perfect geopolitical sense, and that have never happened up until now. If we have a long-term view to 2050, the mainstream is going to be renewable energy.
Next up, introducing Axios politics reporter Sophia Cai.
Thanks, guys, for being here. Our next guest needs no introduction. He is author of Hillbilly Elegy and senator from the great state of Ohio. Please welcome Senator JD Vance. Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your commitment to answer questions. At Axios, we like to start with the news. Do you support the automakers who are currently on strike in Michigan and in Ohio?
Yeah, so I do support the auto workers, and the way that I frame this is there's a short-term problem and there's a long-term problem. So the short-term problem from the perspective of the workers is, look, they took it on the chin during 2007, 2008. They accepted lower wages when the auto industry really needed some help. And now that the auto industry is doing very well and seeing record profits, they deserve to get their end of the shake. And I agree with that. Fundamentally, I think that when companies are doing well, their workers should benefit too. That's why we have unions in this country. Now, the flip side of this, though, the really worrisome thing is, in the long term, I think the American auto industry has some very, very real stress points that we have to be honest about. And I know that some of my friends on the left don't like to talk about the sort of the way that climate policy has manifested itself in the auto industry is really, really bad for a lot of these workers. And let me just illustrate this with one statistic. So Ford in 2023, this is a Goldman estimate, will lose about $5 billion on its EV unit. So we'll have a very profitable 2023, but the EV unit at Ford is a massive loss center. That's true for the big three auto manufacturers. If you gave the UAW everything that they wanted, meaning the 40% pay increase, the 32-hour work week, the 8 hours on top for overtime, it would cost the Ford Motor Company about $5 billion in 2023. So long as we have this massive amount of government subsidy going to this industry, the EV industry, which, by the way, between components, between minerals, between mining, is still heavily concentrated in China, you can give the auto workers a short-term raise, but in 5 years from now, they're not going to have any jobs. So the worry that I have as I see this shaking out is you see the UAW leadership and you see the corporate leadership of the big three really leaning into, and I think buying the Biden administration's frame about electric vehicles, and yet the workers, I think, are very skeptical of this. Consumers are very skeptical of it, and I think those are the two groups that are getting screwed in this whole exchange.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the negotiations are between the automakers and the union. So, walk me through exactly how they're supposed to force Biden's hand on the EV issue.
Yeah, well, I think both the automakers and the union leadership, and I really think that there is a significant difference between, I think Fain is his name, the leader of the UAW, and where a lot of his members are, both politically, but also on this EV question in particular. I think these guys give the Biden administration cover, right? Because if
you think they're in cahoots.
I don't know if they're in cahoots or if they're just saying the same thing because they have the same political allies, but they're both giving the Biden administration cover on the EV thing. And I just think it's too far, it's too fast. And it's one thing to subsidize an industry that is primarily headquartered in the United States of America. It's another thing to subsidize an industry that is primarily headquartered in China. And given that what we've learned in the last 40 years, do we really want to push our industrial base further and further into East Asia? The other thing that I think is important to sort of understand here, and I've heard this, by the way, on the Hill, and not from people who would say this on the record, but the fact that the EV industry is so concentrated in China reduces the bargaining power of the UAW. It actually reduces the workers' leverage because the more offshored the American auto industry is, the more willing the big three are going to be willing to say to the UAW, well, look, you don't have any leverage over us, right? We rely on other workers.
Most of the auto workers are not working on those EV plants.
Correct. Right now, most of them are not. But that is certainly, I think, the pressure that the Biden administration is applying here. And I think that it's just too early. It's too far, too fast. The final point I'd make on this is, one of the ways that car manufacturers and car dealers measure demand for a particular vehicle is how many days is this car spending on a lot, right? Because you've got to bring it in and then you want to sell it. You don't want to spend too much time on the lot. And this is the Japanese automakers that are doing business in America, but it's also the American automakers. Their traditional combustion engine cars are on the lot between 20 and 30 days. That's pretty good. Okay, that's about where they want. Yeah. But for the EVs, it's 90 to 120 days. So consumers we've sort of hit the plateau for the EV thing. If we keep on subsidizing it, it's going to be bad for the country.
Yeah, you think the demand's not there, yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to move on. Everyone has seen the train wreck in East Palestine.
Sure.
You took this personally.
Yeah. Well, East Palestine, as I've said this publicly before, reminds me a lot of my hometown in Middletown, Ohio, even though they're sort of on opposite ends of the state. And what I mean is, sort of small towns, not especially economically prosperous. I think both East Palestine and Middletown have been affected by some bad decisions that have been made over the last half century. And there's also a train track that runs right through the middle of Middletown, Ohio. Same thing for East Palestine. And what people I think don't realize about East Palestine is if it had happened a couple miles in either direction differently, you could have killed a lot of people. Okay, in some ways they were lucky that the train crashed where it did and not a mile down the road into a residential neighborhood. But my basic view is, look, we have way too many train crashes, and everybody saw the images, everybody saw the toxic effects of it. If you go to East Palestine today, they're still living with, their creek beds, the watersheds are still contaminated. It's going to take a long time to clean that up, and it's crazy to me. It's crazy we have so many train crashes.
So Norfolk Southern yesterday announced this program they're offering homeowners in East Palestine, the difference between the appraised market value of their home and the sale price. What do you make of that offer? I mean, should your constituents be taking them up on it?
Well, it's a good offer. We'll see if they put their money where their mouth is. So they announced this program again yesterday. They actually had sort of rolled it out about 6 months earlier. And my view is they had rolled it out to try to reduce the political will to pass the Railway Safety Act because, look, they were saying, well, look, we're doing these nice things for the people of East Palestine. Don't force us to observe some common sense safety standards. And if you talk to constituents on the ground, of course, as I do often, and as we're sort of getting inbound, my staff is getting inbound, what's been actually the reality on the ground is people have been very frustrated by this program. They feel like they make requests, the requests aren't met. The money's not getting out the door. So the program is a good idea and concept, but I'd like Norfolk Southern to actually do the thing that they're promising. If they're making promises and they're not meeting them, they're just going to have more problems.
Okay, well, let's talk about railway safety. In a chamber that is run on seniority, it's pretty rare for a junior senator to come in and, you've managed to get what will probably be an actual win in railway safety. How do you reconcile this urge to get things done with your colleagues in the middle and culture warrior JD Vance?
Well, so let me say just one, it's a job like any other, and you have to work hard at it and try to do things well. I did not run for the U.S. Senate because I needed a platform. I could get on Fox News or CNN whenever I wanted to well before I was a senator, so I ran for the job because I actually wanted to do something with it. And that's what I've tried to do. And, knock on wood, the Railway Safety Act is not yet passed, so I am very confident we're going to get it out the door this fall. So I am in a good place there. How do I reconcile? I guess I don't think you have to reconcile it at all. If I were to try to, sort of channel the frustrations of the grassroots of the conservative movement, what I would say is they're sick and tired of people using this town as a high-priced debating society instead of as a forum to actually solve problems, right? The Congress and the Senate are there to do things, not just for people to whine and complain and go on TV all the time.
Well, you have some convincing to do.
Yeah, well, but I think that when sort of people say, well, he has a sort of a very solid place within the conservative grassroots.
I mean, you do.
But he's also working to get things done. I guess I just don't think that they need to be reconciled. The people who sent me expected me to do something, and they don't, I'll work with whoever I need to work with to get something done.
Okay, let's talk about impeachment.
Sure.
You obviously support efforts to impeach President Biden. Could that wind up backfiring on Republicans?
Well, I think it could backfire on Republicans if we go further than the evidence. What I would say about my view on impeachment, and I try to take a slightly different perspective on this because the Senate is in this system, the House is sort of the indicter, is the grand jury, and we're the jury on the Senate side. So I try to sort of be cautious about what we know and what we don't know. What I would say about impeachment is there are very credible pieces of evidence. We don't know if they're true, but there are credible pieces of evidence that suggest the President of the United States used his prior office to enrich himself and his family. Now, if that's true, then certainly he should be impeached. And whether it hurts us or not is not the right question. I think we have to follow the evidence. And if we get too far ahead of the evidence, then I think the American people will penalize us. But if we actually keep this rigorous, then I think the American people, look, you have to sort of let the chips fall where they may, but I think we'll be in a good place.
Well, and the rules say that if the House moves this to the Senate must immediately take it up.
Right.
Would you still be supportive of these efforts if it means coming at the expense of these other bills, the bipartisan bills that you've worked on?
I think, again, you have to follow this stuff where it leads. And the Senate has many constitutional obligations, and some of those obligations conflict with others. But if the House sends us articles of impeachment, I think we have to do our job and actually adjudicate. And I think it's especially true, again, assuming the House is judicious with this and doesn't get too far ahead of the evidence. I don't think it's a distraction. I think fundamentally the Senate will have an important constitutional duty at that time, and I plan to do it.
Even if it means not having floor time for railway safety.
There will be downsides to it. Certainly there will be downsides to it, but I think, again, we have to follow the evidence where it leads. There are a lot of downsides to any criminal case, right? And I think we have to recognize that if the evidence suggests that we need to do something here, then we have to do it.
Okay,
we can't let politics and other things sort of distract us from the core mission. And the core mission at the end of the day in this proceeding is to do justice.
You're a Marine. You know the
Sure.
importance of a seamless transition at the top. What do you think of Senator Tuberville's military blockade?
Yeah. So it's funny because I think the Democrats think that they have a real sort of political winner here, so they're pushing it pretty aggressively.
I don't think they think it's a winner at all.
I think Democrats think that it's a winner for them. I think they think it's a loser for the Republicans. Look,
what do you think?
Here's my defense of what Senator Tuberville's doing, and I've defended him, and I'll sort of give the full-throated defense. The military cannot be an arm of either administration's social policy. Okay, so there's a law that says that abortions will not be publicly funded, and the Biden administration, I think, is circumventing that law in a way that destroys credibility of the military. There is a reason why we have, frankly, a crisis of recruitment in the all-volunteer military, the first time we've had a recruitment crisis really since the end of the Vietnam War. And I think it's because the perception among a lot of people who would otherwise enlist is that the military has become politicized. So that is the backdrop against what Senator Tuberville is doing, what he's doing. My view here is Joe Biden could solve this problem, or Chuck Schumer could solve this problem in one of two ways. First, there are 108 people who are currently being held by Senator Tuberville. If Chuck Schumer made us sit in our chairs for one day and do a vote-a-rama, we could clear every single one of those 108 votes. Let's vote on them, right? Tuberville can't prevent them from getting on. All he's doing is forcing a vote on each one. I think it's reasonable to say we should evaluate these guys one by one. The second thing Biden could do...
Even less floor time for railway safety.
Well,
it's true.
So, look, the thing I'll say is we don't have that much floor time at all because senators don't work very hard.
Right.
I'd be very supportive of senators working harder and doing more of our job.
But I think that's beside the point. Really what's happening...
No. Here's why it's not beside the point. We have, yesterday I think that we had 3 votes. We were there for 9 hours. What the hell were we doing if not voting? We're senators. Our job is to vote on things. I would like the Senate to work at a slightly stronger clip. We could easily have 15 to 20 votes a day and still accommodate committee hearings and all these other things. We should just do that. This is really not about Coach Tuberville's hold. This is, I think, about whether the Senate functions appropriately, and right now it doesn't.
But at the end of the day, to be clear, you're supportive of holding up, 180 senior military promotions for 12 abort. I mean, this is Tuberville's explicit reason for blocking it, is that there's military. But, the Pentagon said there were 12 women over, a year who used these funds to receive an abortion.
What I'll say is I'm supportive of forcing each one to come up for a vote. I really think that's the right approach. And the other thing I'll say about what Tuberville's policy that hasn't been said yet is part of the reason why you want each one of these guys or gals to have a vote is because you want to examine their record individually. Most of the people that have been nominated, I think, are good people. Some of the people who've been nominated really shouldn't just sail through unanimous consent. We should vote on them, and I think we should vote some of them down.
Ukraine. Your position on Ukraine is that, you believe that by arming Ukraine, it's taking away from our ability to defend against China.
Correct.
What specifically, though, are we not able to do because we are sending money to Ukraine?
Well, I haven't seen the most recent reports. The last time that I looked at this, we're about $18 billion in military equipment that we promised to Taiwan. We have not actually delivered. And if you look at the weapon systems that the Taiwanese want, whether it's 150 millimeter artillery shells, longer range artillery shells, HIMARS, various missile systems. A lot of that stuff we don't make enough of to support two conflicts, and we're sending it to Ukraine instead of we're sending it to Taiwan. Now, why is that a big problem? Because look, once a war, God forbid, if China invades Taiwan, that is the end of sending weapons to Taiwan. The Chinese will have complete control of the sea theater. My worry is that we have now a very short window, maybe it's a year, God forbid, hopefully it's longer than that, where we can give the Taiwanese enough weapons to defend themselves that they can actually prevent a Chinese invasion from happening. The Chinese will look and say, yeah, we could take it, but it would be such a high cost, we might as well just live in peace with the Taiwanese. My fear is that we're just sending way too many weapon systems to Ukraine, and we don't make enough of them. My view might be different, probably not, honestly, but my view might be different, or at least it'd be open to persuasion if we made enough Patriot and HIMARS and other missile systems to support two theaters, but we just don't. And this goes back to sort of the UAW strike. We have decimated the industrial base in this country, and you don't see this anywhere more clearly than the defense industrial base. We don't make enough weapons to support both of them.
So we give up one for the sake of another one that's not really an open theater yet.
I think that we give up one for the one that's in our national security interest. I think the Taiwanese, look, if Taiwan is invaded by China, it would be obviously brutal. Ukraine-Russia has been very brutal, but it would completely decimate the American economy. The amount of dependence that we have on various Taiwanese manufacturing, especially Taiwan Semiconductor, means that the amount that the Chinese would have leverage over us is extraordinary. Look, I don't like what the Russians did to Ukrainians, but let's all be honest here. Russia is a much less substantial power and a much less substantial threat over the next generation than China. If we give China even more economic leverage over us, I really worry about what they could do.
I'm going to make one more point here for you to respond to here. We're learning a lot about what a modern battlefield looks like in Ukraine through our involvement there, and it's defined by drones, rapidly evolving threats, real-time lessons about what it means and what we need to do to modernize our military. Is that not helping us in our defense against China?
I don't look at this stuff in super binary terms. Look, there are reasons to support Ukraine. I just think on the balance of the evidence, we should be much more focused on China, and consequently, my view is we should cut off our support of the Ukrainians pretty much now. But are there things that we are gaining? Yes. The flip side of that, sort of go down that rabbit hole, is the Russians and the Chinese are also learning a lot about modern American defense capabilities, about our limitations, about the conflicts between our manufacturing and industrial base and our ambitions in the theater. So I do think that there are benefits to us supporting the Ukrainians. I just think there are benefits to other people, and on the balance of factors, how I weight this stuff out, I just think it's very clear that we've reached a point where we shouldn't be supporting the Ukrainians. And I recognize that in this town, I'm certainly in the minority.
Okay, let's move on to another topic.
Sure.
Throughout the 2016 election, you repeatedly called Trump reprehensible and an idiot. What has changed?
He reminds me of that all the time. Trump has a very long memory. That's the thing that I'll say about him. I mean, what changed is a couple things. So one is I got to know him personally. And I actually a lot of the things that people took very personally, and I think frankly the media overreacted to, and I personally overreacted to, look, the guy has a sense of humor. He's fundamentally a person who pokes fun at the political system.
That's why you like him?
That's one of the reasons I like him, absolutely, is because I think that in some ways we live in an absurd political system, and it benefits from somebody who has a bit of a sense of humor about it. And if you take everything too seriously, you sound like I do in 2016 rather than how I sound in 2023. And I think, I'm a lot wiser about our political process today than I was back then.
I mean, I quite liked what you sounded like in Hillbilly Elegy.
I like what I said in Hillbilly Elegy too. I didn't talk about Trump or Clinton in the book, but The second thing I'll say is, look, he was a very good president. When you look at, so the most important chart to me maybe in American life, the most important chart, and I know there are a lot of Democrats out here who are going to disagree with me, but I go and look this up, is wages and how they have trailed productivity. The American worker, the economy gets more productive, GDP goes up, and the wages of workers were stagnant. For effectively 30 years, 40 years, really, from the 80s until about 2016, 36 years. 2017, that number starts going up. Wages actually start to catch up to productivity for the first time pretty much in my life. I was born in 1984. Workers have always been getting screwed. Now, why is that? Now, my view is a few reasons. Number one, Trump actually pushed back against globalization for the first time of any American administration since I've been alive. More reshoring, more domestic investment, more domestic manufacturing. Number two, he actually had a border policy that gave workers greater bargaining power, because I think there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that when you allow 10, 20, 30 million illegal aliens into your country, it reduces the bargaining power of workers on the bottom. So this is a guy who, for all his bravado and for all the problems that I had with him in 2016,
saw him in action.
Delivered.
You saw him in action.
And I think that chart, again, and by the way, it started going in the wrong direction in 2021. So we have real evidence here of how to give workers more bargaining power, how to raise wages. It worked. I'd like us to try it again.
Senator, would you be open to being Trump's VP pick?
Look, I'm going to do everything I can to help Donald Trump. And I think he's a very good president. I think he'll be a very good president again. I think Biden's a bad president. So I'm going to try to help him however I can. However he asks me to help, I will do it. But my personal view is the most useful thing that I can do for Donald Trump, and not Donald Trump, for the country, is to be a good legislator in the United States Senate and actually support the agenda that can bring workers higher wages and bring peace to the world. That's another thing we didn't talk about. Trump was the first real pushback against a crazy foreign policy consensus in this town. But I think I need to support, and I can be most useful supporting the agenda in the United States Senate.
Hill.
That's where I'd like to be. But look, I'm going to help him get elected however I can.
You went to law school with Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah,
My
same class.
understanding is that, you knew him decently well.
Yeah.
Do you think he'd be a good president?
I do actually. At least I think he'd be a lot better than the guy we currently have. It's funny. So we didn't just know each other in law school. I mean, this was probably 2019, because it was right before COVID. He actually came over to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. So he and I are pretty good friends. Here's the thing I'd say about Vivek. And look, I think it's a moot point, because I think Donald Trump's certainly going to be the nominee, and I think probably will win re-election in 2024. But what I think is really interesting about Vivek's candidacy, and a lot of Republican politicians, a lot of very ambitious people that I serve with in the U.S. Senate, it's like the thing that they say about the U.S. Senate is that it's 100 people who wake up every morning and look in the mirror and see a future president. These people are psychotically ambitious as a class of human beings. The lesson from Vivek's candidacy is that if you say interesting things and actually run on big ideas, you can capture people's imagination. Where if you repeat the same old tired slogans, nobody's going to give a shit about your candidacy, and they shouldn't.
Well, it helps he has no record. In a book coming out about...
It does, by the way. I mean, I agree with you. It actually does help when you don't have a record, because then, people like you can't beat up on him for all the things that he's done in the past.
Well, I'll get to Vivek. we have invited Vivek to come join us. In a book coming out about Mitt Romney, he had this to say about you. I don't know that I can disrespect someone more than JD Vance. It's like, really? You sell yourself so cheap? How do you sit next to him at lunch? What do you have to say to Mitt Romney?
Well, first, Mitt Romney sits next to me at lunch all the time, and he's never made any indication that he has a problem. Look, I don't like the petty personal stuff. First of all, Mitt Romney is no stranger to changing his mind about an issue in public, and so he's the one to talk on that particular issue. And second, I come from a place where if you have a problem with somebody, the way that you air that is by looking in the eye and actually expressing it to him man to man. I don't know that if I have a problem with anybody, I'm going to whine to an Atlantic reporter about it. I would just talk to him in person. And so that'll be my approach with any of my colleagues of whatever side of the aisle they're on.
I want to get to something a little more personal. In Hillbilly Elegy, you write extensively about your upbringing in Hill Country and your relationship with your mama, who has filled a huge void left by your mother and your father. How has your family life influenced your approach to serving in the Senate?
A few things. I mean, number one is I try not to get jaded, and I'm only 9 months into this job, so it would be really ridiculous if I was jaded. But I try to be cognizant of the fact that my family looked at all towards the United States Capitol. and really admired it and admired what happened there. They would get frustrated with it like anybody else would, but I try to remind myself that this is a very cool job. It's an honor to have, and that imposes certain expectations and burdens on people. You should actually do something with it. You should try to be a good public servant as much as you can. The second thing is I do think that I have a certain perspective for the struggles of normal people in this country. Sometimes we were poor, sometimes we were sort of working, sort of lower middle class. We kind of oscillated between those two poles. But, when things get expensive and you only have $300 in a bank account, it really, really hurts. And I try to just remember that. And I try to remember that, so many of the social problems that we have, from, the addiction crisis to the breakdown of a lot of American families. Obviously, we have a lot of kids growing up with a lot of childhood trauma. I try to remind myself that there's a very deep connection between what's going on in the community, in the economy, and some of these very serious social problems. So that's maybe just the perspective that I take to it. But day to day, I think I just take a certain awe. It's really cool that we get to do this. It's really cool that we get to sort of disagree and debate these things. And it's really a great privilege to live in a country like this that allows a kid like me to go and serve in the U.S. Senate. Even if you think I'm doing a terrible job, it's kind of cool that to the guy in the hat clapping out there, it's a really cool thing. And so I just try to keep a certain sense of awe about the Republican form of governance that we have, because I think that's how my grandparents saw it.
Mm-hmm. And you respect the process. One last question. A lot of your book reminds me of my father's struggle, and neither of his parents graduated from high school. And Amazing. You mentioned that, and we're up here having this conversation. And you've also mentioned that you've heard from a lot of Black Americans who'll come up to you and be like,
sure,
listen, this book is my story. And I wonder, what is, now that you are in office and you do have a say, what is the single most important policy solution that you've got to address, what you call it, unequal opportunity, also sure. Learned hopelessness, that cuts across all these different coalitions?
Yeah, it's very hard to pick one, but I'll go back to what I said. The most important chart in the country the last 40 years is workers losing wages relative to the economy as a whole. If you live in a community where a guy at the 30th percentile or a guy at the 60th percentile is doing pretty well, then it helps in a whole lot of ways, right? There's more resources to go around. There's more people donating to the local community organizations that can help people who are really down on their luck. Sort of the people that are at the 10th percentile, not the 30th percentile. And so this is why my views on deindustrialization, on manufacturing, on building an economy that actually works for people sort of at the middle and at the lower middle is really, really important. Not because that solves every problem, not because a good job is the solution to every social ill, but because I think things get so much worse when money gets tight. And in a lot of ways, the story of Toledo, Ohio, or Middletown, Ohio, which is where I grew up, or a lot of small towns and big towns in the state, certainly the story of Cleveland, which used to have one of the biggest Black middle classes in the country, and has really struggled economically, though good things are happening in Cleveland in the last 4 or 5 years, is that you had this industrial economy that gave people, even people who didn't go to college, an opportunity in a middle class life, and then it just sort of disappeared in a matter of 20 or 30 years. I don't think that we get back to real prosperity unless you make more of your own stuff and unless you have the type of manufacturing economy that can support middle class workers. And I think there's a lot that flows from that, right? So why is it that we have, hundreds of billions of dollars of college debt in this country, not even for people who have degrees? I'm talking about people who went to college but never actually got a degree out of it. Why do we tell every single child that the pathway to a middle class is to layer yourself up with $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 worth of debt, knowing that half of them won't even graduate from college, they'll have a huge debt bomb? Why don't we have other alternatives of education and pathways to the middle class? We really radically underinvest in vocational education. We've worked on some stuff just in the Senate to allow people to use Pell Grants for things like an electrical school or other apprenticeship programs. So there's a lot that flows from that. But look, if you have the median worker doing better, it solves a lot of social problems and makes a lot of others better.
Senator, we are way over time. Before we go, I'd like to thank Bank of America for making this possible. And thanks for each of you in the audience who showed up and stayed around. Thanks for tuning in virtually. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you.